Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep today into a high-stakes, high-tech corner of the world
Hmm.
that it sounds like pure fiction, but is absolutely real.
It really does.
Our focus is not, the traditional contraband you might think of. It's silicon. Specifically, the high-end AI GPUs that are now, you could argue they're the most fiercely contested resource on the planet.
Absolutely. And they're fueling this multi-billion-dollar black market that spans entire continents.
We are talking about devices like the NVIDIA A100, the H100. These are the powerhouse chips that drive modern AI research and deployment.
And the sheer scale of it, the audacity of the whole operation is just stunning. For this, we're drawing really heavily from an incredibly comprehensive investigative report that traced this entire illicit supply chain.
That's right. And we should say, for those of you who want the full visual experience, you have to check out the special feature video from Gamers Nexus.
Yeah.
It's presented by Steve Burke.
It's phenomenal. 3.5 hours.
It is truly phenomenal work, and it details the scope of what is really a technological Cold War between the United States and China. What we're doing today is distilling those hours of deep research into the most impactful nuggets for you.
The scale here is just immense. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars worth of restricted technology moving every single year. The U.S. objective seems pretty clear on paper.
Right. Maintain that technological leadership and restrict the progress of Chinese military and their advanced commercial AI projects.
But the response from China is just as forceful. You have the Chinese Cyberspace Administration labeling certain U.S.-made products as major security risks.
Citing what specifically?
Potential concerns over government backdoors, things embedded right into the hardware itself. So you get this clash. Aggressive prohibition on one side, driven by national security, meeting this intense, almost existential demand on the other.
And this is where the environment just gets bizarre. I think the core finding of the investigation, and maybe the most dystopian takeaway for me, is that experts and users in the sector, they now judge wealth not by cash or stocks,
Not by property, no.
but by how many GPUs they have. That single count, that's the new definitive measure of success and power in high-end AI.
It's the new gold.
That framing really sets the stage perfectly. So our mission today is to trace that whole journey for you. We need to dissect the confusing, often contradictory world of U.S. export controls and then track the entire illicit pipeline.
The source calls it the ant line.
The ant line, right.
Yeah.
From the original American seller, who might just be someone innocently posting on Facebook Marketplace, all the way to the end user in China, we're going to find out what parts of this ban actually work and what parts are, well, just accelerating local ingenuity.
So let's begin where all the chaos really originates. The attempt to regulate technology through some very complex legislation.
The whole premise of the ban seems simple enough on the surface, right?
Okay.
Just restrict critical hardware from falling into the hands of foreign adversaries.
Seems simple.
But the complexity of defining what is critical hardware, that's where everything just falls apart.
Indeed. The U.S. government imposed these really severe restrictions on American companies like NVIDIA and AMD. It prevents them from selling GPUs above a specific performance level to Chinese companies.
And to do that, you'd need a license, which
are rarely, if ever, granted. It's basically a full stop.
And while everyone, focuses on the massive data center titans, the A100, H100, H200, the new B100, what really surprised me in the investigation was that the ban also caught some high VRAM consumer gaming cards.
That's a critical detail, and it's so often overlooked. We're talking specifically about cards like the RTX 4090 and its rumored successor, the RTX 5090. They were either banned outright or were targeted for future bans.
And why? What's the logic there?
It comes down to VRAM. These cards have a significant amount of video memory, and even with their reduced performance compared to, say, an A100, that VRAM makes them highly viable for certain AI tasks.
Like training smaller models.
Exactly. Training smaller, localized large language models, the performance threshold was set so low that it just swept up all this consumer hardware into the net.
Now, this leads us to the critical legal gap, and it's, I think, really crucial for you to understand. The restrictions apply exclusively to sellers who are governed by U.S. law.
Precisely. This was a point highlighted by Dr. Vinci Chao, an economist and professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. The ban is focused entirely upstream.
So it's about who sells it, not who buys it.
Right. It is, and I'm quoting here, completely legal for Chinese companies, research institutions, and citizens to buy or possess these devices once they are physically present in China.
So wait, if a research facility in Shenzhen gets their hands on a top-end H100 through some gray market channel, they're not breaking any laws in China.
None whatsoever. The entire legal risk falls on the U.S. company that failed to secure its supply chain, or, much more often, on the individual smuggler who physically moved the component across the border.
And that framework is why the transactions on the ground, even for these banned goods, often just feel like normal business-to-business commerce.
Totally. The local demand side just sees it as a simple procurement challenge. It's more expensive, sure, but it's not a criminal act to them.
So let's talk about the specific, and I think we could say, flawed mechanism the U.S. government created to define this performance cutoff. They invented something called the Total Processing Performance Score, or TPP.
Ah, the TPP score.
They set the limit at 4,800. The source called the TPP an absolute clusterfuck, which is pretty strong language. Can you walk us through why it was such a disaster?
That assessment is, I think, entirely warranted, and here's the technical reason why. The TPP calculation wasn't based on practical, real-world benchmarks.
Like how fast it can actually train a model.
Exactly. It was based on these arbitrary figures pulled directly from the specification sheets.
So how do they even calculate it? What's the formula?
It multiplies a metric called MAC tops, which stands for tera operations per second, or TOPS against the bit length of the mathematical operation.
Okay, and MAC tops are?
They're a theoretical peak performance metric. It's the number the manufacturer, like NVIDIA, puts on the box. So the U.S. government essentially based its entire national security definition on marketing brochure numbers.
So NVIDIA, the manufacturer, had the ultimate cheat code. They knew the formula. Walk me through how they could have exploited that.
Oh, absolutely. It's simple. If a U.S. ban requires a TPP score of 4,800 or less, NVIDIA can just design a variant of an existing chip. They could, say, slightly lower the clock speed, shave off a few core counts.
Just enough to get under the line.
Just enough so the theoretical MAC tops number, when you multiply it by the bit length, mathematically dips just below that 4,800 threshold. They weren't making the chip significantly slower for AI in the real world. They were just creating a paper-compliant chip.
That's genius in a very cynical way. They keep access to this massive Chinese market just by playing a bureaucratic numbers game without really giving up their technological edge.
Exactly. It became this complex and, for them, very profitable cat-and-mouse game. And to add another layer to the flaw, the initial TBT calculation critically ignored VRAM capacity.
Which we just said is paramount for LLMs.
That's everything. If the model doesn't fit in memory, you can't run it efficiently. But the initial rules only focused on this theoretical peak speed, ignoring the actual practical limitation for modern AI work.
And that massive omission set the stage for one of the most politically volatile moments in this whole saga, the H20.
The H20 was NVIDIA's direct response to those original TPP rules. They designed this chip specifically to comply. It had a massive 96 gigabytes of VRAM. That's an increase over the H100's 80 gigs.
But the performance was throttled.
Right. Its clock speeds and core counts were significantly throttled to make sure its TPP score landed safely under that 4,800 rule.
So they successfully navigated the regulatory maze, but then the ground just shifted from under them?
The rules changed midstream. The Biden administration revised the diffusion rule, which effectively banned chips that were designed purely as TPP workarounds, and that included the H20.
So it wasn't just a political setback. That had to be a huge financial blow.
Massive. AMD and NVIDIA collectively declared write-offs of over $6 billion because of all the inventory that was suddenly stranded by these revised controls.
So let me get this straight. They did the homework, they designed the compliant chip, and then the definition of compliant changed, turning billions of dollars of inventory into potential dead weight.
And then, almost immediately, the situation turned into a political football that really made you question the ban's true intent.
There was a lot of lobbying, right?
Yeah.
Jensen Huang, NVIDIA's CEO, was everywhere criticizing the controls.
He was highly visible, trying to find some path forward, and the solution proposed under the Trump administration that followed was just unbelievable.
What was it?
It was startling. A deal was proposed. Allow the sales of the H20 and AMD's MI308 chips, these compliant but still very powerful versions, in exchange for a 15% revenue share.
15%. Paid to who?
Paid directly to the U.S. government.
Wait, to the government. That sounds less like a national security measure and more like a pay-to-win policy for getting export clearance.
It absolutely compromises the integrity of the security rationale. I mean, if the price of admission is just cutting the U.S. Treasury in on the deal, what are we even doing here?
It definitely fueled that speculation that the ban was less about stopping tech transfer and more about leveraging U.S. regulatory power for financial gain.
If national security is truly paramount, why is there a price tag on the ban? It's a fair question. But in the end, the political chaos kind of made the H-20 saga moot anyway.
Herso.
China eventually came out and said they didn't even want the H-20 anymore. They called it obsolete because of all the uncertainty and the delays.
So if you connect all these dots, the constantly shifting, confusing metrics, flawed formulas like TPP, the rule changes, the politicization, it all just ensures that the black market doesn't just survive.
It thrives. The smuggling community is just responding to a volatile market signal that's been deliberately restricted, creating these massive, predictable price gaps. The difficulty in compliance is directly proportional to the profitability of smuggling. Every time the rules change, it just adds to the risk premium and the potential reward for anyone willing to exploit the loopholes.
The controls are designed to stop the flow, but that demand just ensures the flow finds a new path. So now let's look at the operational side of it. How these GPUs physically move across the globe.
And this isn't, some centralized monolithic cartel. It's a very linear, highly fragmented, and often surprisingly mundane operation.
That fragmentation is key to its resilience.
It is. The source uses this Chinese analogy, May banana, which refers to a linear pipeline where each ant or small operator serves a very specific low-risk role.
So they break the whole transaction down into these discrete steps.
Exactly. Acquisition, transport, distribution. It minimizes the exposure of any single individual to the entire scope of the crime.
Okay, so let's trace this ant line through all the detailed roles, starting at the very beginning in the U.S.
So at the very start, you have the source. And this is typically an innocent U.S. end user, maybe someone just upgrading their workstation, or it could even be factory employees skimming defective scrap parts.
And they just list their high-end card on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace.
Totally unaware of its final destination. And that card is then intercepted by the plug. This is the U.S.-based acquirer who buys from the source. This is the first professional link in the chain.
And the anecdote about the Arizona plug is brilliant. It just captures the low-key but high-tech absurdity of this whole operation.
It's amazing. We're talking about a Chinese national operating an ATX testing rig, complete with a battery power supply.
In the trunk of his Toyota Prius.
Right in the trunk of his Prius. He uses this mobile setup to verify that the cards he's buying are legitimate and functional before he moves them down the chain.
So he's literally running quality control from the back of his sedan. The contrast is just, it's astonishing. High-tech AI cargo being brokered via a battery-powered rig in a car trunk.
It really is. And the plug acquires these high-end consumer cards, like the RTX 4090s, for a fixed price, say $2,000 flat. But here's the surprising part. His profit margin is actually pretty slim.
How slim?
Often under $300 per GPU, and that's before you factor in gas, travel, all the logistics costs.
So why would you operate for such slim margins when the risk of getting caught is so substantial?
Because the whole operation relies on volume and mitigating that risk, the profit is sustainable because the plug works with extreme efficiency and moves huge quantities of these cards.
So they're not looking for one massive score.
No, they're looking for reliable, high-volume flow. It just emphasizes that the ban creates this exploitable price difference that only needs a few $100s of margin to sustain the entire physical logistics network.
So once it's acquired and verified in the Prius trunk, the next step is the mule. This is the person responsible for physically getting the GPU into the restricted territory.
And often, the plug minimizes his own risk by acting as his own mule. He'll just hand carry the devices during pre-scheduled personal trips back home.
But there are more organized efforts, too.
Oh, yeah. Overseas students are frequently used. They're returning from their U.S. studies with what they can defensively call personal GPUs that they bought legally at a U.S. retailer.
And then they just immediately resell them for a huge markup when they land in Asia.
Exactly. The weakness in enforcement really relies on the customs officers. They have to know, or even care, that a specific model number, an RTX 4090 for example, is restricted by some complex U.S. export law. It's just not a priority at most entry points.
A single PCIe card is way easier to move than a whole server.
Way easier. And once that cargo is across the border, often through Hong Kong or Macau, it moves to the middleman, or the fence.
These are people with local networks, often using pseudonyms like Silver or Vincent.
Right. And they receive the physical GPUs in local warehouses, and they act as this crucial interface between all the small individual smugglers and the more established, localized distribution networks.
The image of Vincent is so compelling. The report describes him as a concierge service. He's taking these huge B2B orders online, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment.
And then he just walks across the street to a warehouse or a computer mall to pick up the stock.
It's that contrast again. It highlights the local impunity. High-stakes, restricted technology is being moved with the most mundane logistics you can imagine. It's just seamless, integrated trade hiding in plain sight.
Then you have the fixer. This role is represented by figures like Junga. This isn't always part of the immediate smuggling pipeline, but it's critical for sustaining the overall ecosystem.
Because new supply is restricted and expensive.
Absolutely. So the longevity of the existing GPUs is vital. These fixers, they modify, they repair, and they refurbish cards. They keep the most valuable components, the silicon dies. The VRAM chips in active circulation for way longer than they would be in a normal, unrestricted market where you just buy a new one.
And finally, we get to the user, the final demand driver. And this demand is fragmented, right? It ranges from large enterprises needing a few dozen cards for a critical project,
All the way down to a university lab that just needs 4 cards for a specific research project.
So if we look at the constraints this entire pipeline faces, the source concluded that the ban is effective at one thing, and that's stopping the systematic building of a very big cluster.
And what that means precisely is these massive synchronized systems that require hundreds or thousands or even 10,000 high-end GPUs operating together.
The ones housed in those specialized HGX server racks.
Exactly. Those large systems are basically impossible to move undetected. They require sophisticated logistics, huge investment, and very visible construction.
So, the ban successfully kneecaps the large, centralized, government-funded supercomputer projects. But the preference just shifts entirely to individual PCIe cards.
And those can still fuel small to medium scale AI research and commercial development. It's at a significantly increased cost and complexity, sure, but the objective of stopping all progress is clearly failing.
Right, they stop the supertanker, but the black market is just a fleet of small, maneuverable speedboats that can still deliver the cargo efficiently, one unit at a time.
So let's move from that theoretical pipeline to what it actually looks like on the ground in the major distribution hubs of Hong Kong and Shenzhen.
This is where the sheer openness of this restricted trade becomes just apparent.
Dr. Vinci Chao reiterated this point. For institutions like universities in Hong Kong, getting these cards from middlemen is just standard practice now.
It's just more expensive.
It's just more expensive. And crucially, the process of getting them feels like completely normal commerce. It's shipped via common carriers. There are no clandestine meetings in dark alleys you might associate with illicit trade.
And the investigation showed this activity isn't even tucked away. They found evidence of what they called parallel imports, openly for sale in public computer malls in Hong Kong.
Yeah. They saw banned cards, including the unreleased RTX 5090, just sitting there, readily accessible.
And where were those coming from?
They were frequently sourced from places like Australia and Taiwan and then moved through the smuggling pipeline. And while the price premium was significant, a 5090 was selling for over $4,600 US. The key finding is that they were just physically available at retail.
This really underlines a key psychological difference. For the local consumer, the existence of some complex U.S. export ban, it doesn't even cross their mind.
Not at all. They just see the GPU as an expensive, high-demand product, not an illegal item they're forbidden from buying.
And the physical heart of this whole distribution network is the warehouses located right above the City Market in Shenzhen.
These aren't secret bunkers. They're just poorly lit upper floors of commercial buildings where you have these massive stacks of unlabeled cartons holding thousands and thousands of GPUs.
The juxtaposition is so potent. For the U.S. government, this floor is filled with highly illegal restricted technology. But for the workers who are just sorting and shipping those cartons, it is, in their own words, just their job.
This hiding in plain sight strategy is what feeds all the localized distributors and the online sellers like Vincent.
And this restricted environment, it doesn't just foster trade. It necessitates this radical self-sufficiency and hardware ingenuity.
Yeah.
And that is best exemplified by the work of the fixer shop.
The repair operation run by Junga in Jinzhou.
Right. Since getting new, high-end components is choked by the ban, keeping the existing silicon alive and optimizing it becomes paramount. And Junga's shop is famous on Bilibili, the Chinese video platform, for advanced repairs.
But more importantly, for these custom, highly skilled modifications, their crowning achievement is the creation of unofficial, custom NVIDIA SKUs. Specifically, doubling the VRAM on an RTX 4090 from 24 gigabytes to a stunning 48 gigabytes.
48 gigabytes. On a card that left the factory with half that. That is an enormous leap in practical capability for AI development. For you listening, let's just briefly emphasize again why VRAM matters so much more than raw speed for these LLMs.
I mean, think of VRAM as the physical workspace on your desk. When you're training a large language model like GPT or something similar, the size of that model dictates how much workspace you need.
So if the model is too big to fit on the desk, the 24 gigs of VRAM.
You can't load it, or you have to load it in these agonizingly slow, fragmented chunks. But if you double the desk size to 48 gigs, the entire model can be loaded at once. And even if the processor speed isn't as fast as a Band H100, the mere ability to load and run the model locally outweighs that speed deficit.
Running it slower is infinitely better than not being able to run it at all.
Exactly. So these fixers aren't just repairing, they are custom engineering a superior product that's tailored specifically to bypass the limitations imposed by the U.S. export controls. They're meeting a market need for VRAM that NVIDIA refuses to meet in the compliance space.
The technical process required for this modification, it really illustrates the level of skill that's involved here. It's an absolute technical deep dive. Can you walk us through those engineering steps?
Okay, so first, they have to disassemble the card entirely. Then, they use this precisely controlled heat up to 396 degrees Celsius.
Wow.
Which is what you need to melt the specialized solder used in these components that allows them to gently pull the GPU silicon and the existing memory chips off the board. It's extremely delicate work, a little too much heat, and you fry the component forever.
And once the chips are off, what's next?
They have to meticulously clean and then reball the chips. Reballing means applying these tiny microscopic solder balls to all the connection points.
It sounds like something a jeweler would do.
Imagine a precision jeweler meticulously placing minuscule silver spheres onto a circuit board. That's essentially what they're doing with flux and specialized solder wicks to prepare the chip for remounting onto a new board.
And they need a new board because the original 4090 PCB only had the physical pads for 24 gigs of memory.
Exactly. So they source a custom fabricated PCB, the green circuit board itself, from a third-party supplier. And this new board has extra pads that are wired up to accommodate the additional VRAM modules.
And then they remount everything.
They remount the refurbished, reballed GPU die and the new memory modules onto this custom board. This whole process takes about 2 hours. It's incredibly complex, requires steady hands, and uses specialized high-end equipment.
And the success rate, they claim, for this complicated surgery?
A phenomenal 99%.
99%. They're domestically creating a card that is fundamentally better optimized for the primary task of Chinese AI development, large language model training, which, as we said, prioritizes VRAM.
It is innovation driven entirely by necessity. It's proof that technical restrictions don't eliminate demand. They just shift the focus of innovation from the manufacturer to the repair shop.
We have to turn our attention now to NVIDIA, the primary manufacturer involved here, and their highly contradictory position in this entire drama.
And their actions are probably best summarized by the Chinese idiomatic expression for turning a blind eye.
Right. When sources were questioned about NVIDIA's awareness of the black market, the immediate, unspoken reply was this specific idiom.
The clear consensus within the gray market is that NVIDIA is fully aware of the smuggling and the repurposing of their chips. They just maintain official denial to protect their legal standing and, of course, their lobbying efforts in Washington.
And this denial creates this severe and, frankly, politically savvy contradiction. On one hand, you have their CEO, Jensen Huang, actively lobbying the U.S. government, criticizing the export controls as a failure.
And lamenting that the $50 billion Chinese market is closed to them. But at the same time, they publicly dismiss any reports that suggest widespread smuggling or diversion of their products. They claim it's inefficient and rare.
They're trying to have it both ways. They need to show U.S. regulators that their supply chain is secure while they're fighting to get back into the Chinese market.
And this is where the hard, verifiable evidence that was uncovered by the investigation directly challenges NVIDIA's carefully crafted public narrative. They dismiss reports of chips being moved with these bizarre methods as just tall tales.
The problem for NVIDIA is that those tall tales are actually documented facts.
Often confirmed by official Chinese government postings and customs photos.
Let's just reflect on the absurdity for a moment. First, the prosthetic baby bump story.
That is absolutely confirmed. A 2022 security check at a port near Shenzhen intercepted a woman who had just arrived from Macau, a crucial smuggling hub.
And she was carrying.
Not drugs or weapons, but CPUs and iPhones concealed under a prosthetic baby bump. The sheer audacity to use a fake pregnancy to smuggle high-end silicon. It just speaks volumes about the value of the cargo and the risks these mules are willing to take.
And then there's the other famous anecdote, the lobsters.
Also real.
Uh,
It's documented with official Hong Kong customs photos. A white van was busted on the Zhuhai-Macau Bridge. It was filled with 280 kilograms of undeclared live lobsters.
and that was just the cover.
That was the cover load. Alongside the lobsters were 70 smuggled GPUs. The GPUs were worth far more than the lobsters, but the dual-purpose shipment was designed to distract customs.
These aren't just isolated incidents. They're indicators of an entire robust logistics infrastructure built specifically to bypass the ban.
And yet, when the U.S. Department of Justice arrests high-level smugglers, NVIDIA still tries to spin it.
How do they spin that?
The DOJ arrested 2 Chinese nationals in California for smuggling tens of millions of dollars worth of H100s and 4090s. NVIDIA's defense was that this arrest demonstrates that smuggling is a non-starter.
That's intellectually dishonest. An operation that successfully moves tens of millions of dollars of product before getting caught had a very effective start.
It shows the profitability and the resilience of the network, not its failure.
So if direct arrests and export control laws aren't eliminating the flow, what is the U.S.'s most potent tool for enforcement against Chinese companies?
It's the entity list. Being placed on this list is a severe punishment because it limits a company's ability to conduct any business with U.S. partners, especially in the supply chain or for software.
But the effectiveness of the entity list really depends on how much the target company relies on U.S. business.
Precisely. If you look at a component supplier like Deepcool, the entity list forced them to close their U.S. office. That was a clear, direct impact.
But for others,
For a Chinese GPU middleman like Suten Hale, who primarily transacts with other domestic Chinese companies and bids on local data center projects, the impact of being blacklisted by the U.S. is limited.
they can just redirect their supply sources internally.
Or through non-U.S. partners.
Yeah.
In effect, if you are a domestic Chinese company focused entirely on domestic demand, the entity list is more of a bureaucratic headache than a death sentence.
And the complexity doesn't end there. The investigation detailed these really sophisticated path-through mechanisms.
Facilitated by intermediary companies, often located in neutral zones like Taiwan and Singapore regions that, ironically, have seen significant revenue growth for NVIDIA recently.
So how exactly do these pass-throughs work to disguise the final destination?
It's all about paperwork and temporary handling. A Chinese buyer orders a banned server, but instead of shipping it directly, the U.S. seller ships it legally to an intermediary company in, let's say, Taiwan.
Okay.
That intermediary claims to conduct pre-assembly or system integration or data services on the server. Then they reship the system to the original Chinese buyer, but they use altered document forgery to disguise the true final destination and change the nature of the transaction on paper.
So the intermediary takes on all the liability. They act as a buffer that shields both the original U.S. seller and the final Chinese buyer from direct regulatory scrutiny.
It's a very clean way to legally muddy the waters. The demand is so high that the immense profit margins generated by the ban just create an equal and opposite reaction of ingenuity, logistical complexity, and legal maneuvering in the smuggling pipeline.
We've covered an incredible amount of ground today. I mean, we've traced silicon from an innocent Facebook marketplace listing all the way to a modified high VRAM LLM engine in a Shenzhen research lab.
The clear picture that emerges is that the effectiveness of the U.S. ban is decidedly partial. It successfully stops the massive, centralized, government-funded supercomputer clusters.
The ones that require synchronized shipments of thousands of HGX systems.
Right. That goal, you could argue, is largely achieved.
However, the ban has simultaneously created this fragmented, robust, and very expensive black market that can satisfy the needs of individual researchers, universities, and smaller commercial enterprises.
The necessary GPUs still get in, unit by unit, mule by mule. And perhaps most importantly, they are sustained and enhanced by local ingenuity, like those 48-gigabyte modded cards, which ensures the restricted silicon remains productive.
And this leads us right back to the analysis of NVIDIA's strategic role here. The investigation really confirms that they are fundamentally just a savvy political player.
They lobby U.S. politicians, they criticize the failures of the ban, they leverage political chaos for financial gain, and they do it all while officially denying the reality of the black market that they are indirectly enabling.
The ultimate takeaway for me is that NVIDIA prioritizes its own global market share and its own profit above all else.
Yeah. Whether it's attempting to negotiate a 15% revenue share for export clearance or just turning a blind eye to the repurposed, custom-built cards that are sustaining their market in China, they are playing every side of this technological fence.
And this technological Cold War, it raises a really profound question for the future. If the U.S. ban merely drives domestic Chinese chip manufacturers like Huawei's Ascend initiative to accelerate their timelines,
And if it encourages local talent to become world-class experts at modifying and repairing U.S.-made silicon, who is truly winning or losing this conflict?
that's the provocative thought we want to leave you with today. Is the primary U.S. goal to restrict China's AI progress actually being achieved? Or is the complexity, the cost, and the risk of the ban merely accelerating China's path toward complete self-sufficient expertise in high-end silicon?
Because if they can modify U.S. chips to be better tailored for their needs and then eventually replicate them domestically, the U.S. leverage just disappears entirely.
Something to mull over as the global race for AI leadership continues to heat up.